So today what we're going to do is we're going to get into what's known as the standard trade model. Now we're going to not do things like the Hexaroline model in this class, just because the Hexaroline model is just a particular instantiation of this standard model. Okay, so basically all trade models are derivative of this model here, and they share some overlapping characteristics. So we're just going to focus on those and the standard model, and then later, if necessary, we can come back and modify this model to reflect the needed complications or differences for whatever analysis we want to do. Okay, so the standard approach, or the starting point, comes with these three basic assumptions, okay, or inputs or thoughts. Okay, so the first one is that the PPF, which is known as the Production Possibilities Frontier, summarizes the productive capacities of various countries. And importantly, differences in this determine or give rise to gains from trade. Okay, so the PPF is just what we were talking about in lesson 4 when we talked about comparative advantage. This says right here that this is the maximum amount of Y that this country can produce, and this here would be the maximum amount of X that this country could produce. Okay, and this would correspond to those payoffs, say my brother and I baking cookies and doing laundry. This would be those numbers from those boxes, or they'd be, L over ALY and L over ALX. Okay, so this is just what we've been talking about the whole time, or at least in the last two lessons. Okay, the second point is that the production possibilities frontier, I should have written that, determines a country's relative supply schedule. Okay, we'll unpack that a little bit in part 2 of this lesson, or even in next week's or next time's lesson. And then the third part is that world equilibrium is determined by world relative demand and world relative supply, and that world relative supply lies somewhere between the national supply schedules. Okay, so let's unpack this last part here a little bit. Okay, so what we're saying is that there is what we could call world market for all goods. Okay, so each country competes with one another to buy and sell, or really just to sell, these various products. Okay, so there are oranges that are made in the US, there are oranges that are grown in Spain, there are oranges that are grown in South America, right? There are oranges grown all over the world. And so we can call the market for oranges as a whole the world market. And then which country ends up producing the most oranges would be the one that has a comparative advantage in doing so. Okay, so what we're talking about is a world market that exists that is somewhat independent of each national market. Okay, so we could say, this is the world demand for oranges, and this is the world supply for oranges, and this would determine the world price and the total amount sold in the world, right? And it would be made up of, the US market, which would have its own supply and demand for oranges, its own quantity of oranges, etc., and other countries as well, right? All of these, various countries, which I'm not going to go through and draw, would be input into this world market. Okay, just like individual firms comprise the national market, individual countries comprise the world market. Okay, so what we're going to get into today is talking about which countries do what and how we determine these types of things. Okay, so let's say that the price of wine and cheese, okay, so the world price of wine and cheese have been determined. Okay, and we'll suppose that all nations are price takers, which means that no nation is sufficiently large to influence the market of wine and cheese, okay? Which means that there exists some PC equal to the price of cheese and some PW equal to the price of wine, okay? And so we could define PC over PW as the relative price of cheese to wine, right? Its inverse, or PW over PC, will be the relative price of wine to cheese. And what this tells us is how many units of cheese we must give up to buy a unit of wine. Okay, so in our previous example, this would be how many pounds of cheese it takes to buy 1 pound, or not 1 pound, 1 bottle of wine. Okay, and we can also consider the following fraction, ALC divided by ALW. Okay, and what this tells us is the relative opportunity cost of producing cheese in terms of wine. All right, some economists, or several economists really, will call this the marginal rate of substitution. Or actually, sorry, not substitution, transformation. Okay, not substitution. Apologies for that. It's the marginal rate of transformation, because it's talking about the marginal rate at which we can transform wine into cheese, or cheese into wine. Okay, and so what it's telling us is basically our opportunity costs. Okay, now let's apply this to a straight line PPF function. Okay, and let's say that ALC over ALW is equal to 3. Okay, so what does this 3 tell us? Well, this 3 is telling us that it takes 3 times as much labor to produce cheese as it does to produce wine, right? And this would be 1 pound, and this would be 1 bottle. Okay, and let's suppose that the price of cheese is equal to $2, and the price of a bottle of wine is equal to $10. So this means that got ahead of myself, over PW is equal to 0.2. Okay, and the 0.2 means that we get, whenever we want to purchase wine, we have to give up buying 5 pounds of cheese. Or it says that each pound of cheese, in this case, costs us 1/5 of a bottle of wine. So by buying a pound of cheese, we give up purchasing 1/5 of a bottle of wine. Okay, so if we know this about the country, that their marginal rate of transformation is 3 and the relative price is 0.2, which one should this country produce? Okay, so now we have an interesting puzzle, because we don't have production schedules for other countries, right? Before, I would give you 2 countries, US and let's say China, right? We'd have wine and cheese, and we could figure out a production possibilities frontier from there. We could find opportunity costs, and we could determine who had the comparative advantage. But now we don't have that. All we know is the prices of cheese and wine, and we know the relative amount of labor it takes to produce cheese in terms of wine. So which one should we produce? Okay, so the relative price of cheese is 0.2 bottles of wine, and the opportunity cost of making cheese is 3 bottles of wine. So what should we do? Okay, let's think of it this way. If we produced 3, let's say, pounds of cheese, then we gave up producing 1 bottle of wine. Okay, 3 pounds of cheese is at the prices in the world market. 3 pounds of cheese equals $6. Okay, 1 bottle of wine is equal to $10. Okay, so which one should we do? Should we produce cheese or wine? Okay, well, this analysis suggests that we should produce wine. All right, because if you think about it, ALC over ALW says it takes 3 times as much labor to produce a pound of cheese as it does to produce 1 bottle of wine. So if we produce 3 pounds of cheese, then we give up producing 1 bottle of wine. Okay, this would make this fraction here work, which means we are giving up $6. We're giving up $10 of wine to get $6 of cheese. Well, that doesn't seem to be a smart move. We should try to have the $10 instead of the 6, and so we pick to specialize in the wine.